Is it a sign of genius if you sound like a walking encyclopedia during a conversation? Or are you just annoying? How about being able to rattle off the names of every political leader in the history of your country and their key contributions and the dates that they gave those contributions? Well, although such abilities might seem to be signs of extreme intelligence, they could also indicate something else. In my view, we need to be careful when throwing around terms like high intelligence and genius, because sometimes there's some OCD involved that's not exactly intelligence at play. And many people tend to have tunnel vision and think of genius as a very narrow repertoire of abilities. But as you're about to discover, true signs of high IQ operate quite differently. So let's dive into the most common signs of true genius and pick up some tips on how to improve your intelligence along the way. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmerrymethod.com. You're listening to the Magnetic Merry Method podcast. Hit thumbs up if you've got a thumbs up where you're watching. Get subscribed if you're new here. And let's talk about, what does it mean to be a genius? Well, first of all, have you ever heard that phrase, the genie in a bottle? Well, although the word genius is probably not directly related to the Arabic jinn, where the mythical idea of a genie in a bottle comes from, there are similarities between the words jinn and genius. Our word genius descends probably from Latin for guardian, deity, or spirit, which watches over each person from birth. And you could think of us as being the bottle in which that spirit is living, right? So this word genius can also mean talent, or it can even mean generative power, and nonetheless, this is a power that's living inside the bottle of the human body, right? And this is usually what we mean today by genius. A genius has some kind of powerful intelligence or enhanced ability to create something or to perform a skill at a level that is better than others, right? And the individual might display linguistic intelligence, musical mastery, or maybe they're even drawing upon synesthesia or hyperphantasia when they have those kinds of conditions. And we've talked about synesthesia and hyperphantasia on the Magnetic Merry Method podcast before, but are they really genius, or are they just things that we're gifted with? Well, right or wrong, there's a lot of folk wisdom around what genius means, and the term is thrown around fast and loose, and a lot of people wind up getting duped into thinking they are less intelligent as a result, when in fact, you're probably so close to genius that really you just have to tweak a few things in order to boost your intelligence. And scientists have spent quite a lot of time and energy trying to nail down where exactly the brain produces intelligence. I don't know if you know this, but Einstein's brain was not only preserved for study, but someone actually stole it at one point. One way or the other, in this history of Einstein's brain, scientists did notice a certain thickness to parts of his brain, and it's not clear whether that had to do with physics and how much time he spent imagining different things related to physics and formulas, or if it had more to do with his deliberate practice of music. One way or the other, in the 80s, we really get some interesting stuff coming up. There's some scientists called Geschwind and Galaberda who created a watershed of ways to think about how intelligence develops when they dug into the topic in a book you can read called Cerebral Lateralization. And these neurologists demonstrated the different ways that the left and right hemispheres of the brain develop and theorize why some people have larger right hemispheres than others. And, this has to do with a lot of nature versus nurture conversations and so forth. But at the end of the day, one of the problems that we have is that looking at quote-unquote normal brains doesn't help us that much. Often, scientists have to look at brains that have undergone some form of traumatic brain injury to help them draw conclusions about how different areas of the brain are related to intelligence. Or they have to study brain scans of neurodiverse people who experience autism, savantism, or even a condition called hyperthymastic syndrome that creates the illusion of photographic memory. Sometimes it creates what seems to be very, very advanced autobiographical or superior autobiographical memory. And it's important to study these alternative cases because we see a lot of new trends emerging recently in science. So when it comes to this hyperthymastic memory, for example, some people have been noticing that, that's not really photographic memory. That person has like an OCD habit of journaling about their lives. So they have a very, very superior autobiographical memory, but one that is entangled with the fact that they journal about their lives lives a lot. And it can be that they still have some sort of congenital brain that is giving them a boost, but there's also this behavior there. Now, we also have to take into account that there's really no such thing as a normal brain. This is a bit of a myth. And, we also have to take into account how new data is changing everything. So, for example, there are studies historically of chess players that have concluded that they make decisions better. But newer studies have shown that there's no special transference of chess players and their playing skills to other realms. They're not better decision makers just because they make decisions very well in chess. And you would think that they would be, though, right? Aren't grandmasters trained to make critical decisions? Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that it works in any other area of life. So that chess master who's tweeting about whatever conclusions they have about the political situation in the world and so forth, you might want to take a pause and think critically about what they're saying, rather than just go, oh, chess master talking, I'll take that hook, line, and sinker. Not necessarily. So if you want to increase your IQ, it's really helpful to do that. Put the brakes on anything anyone is saying, including me. We can focus our attention on activities that do have transfer abilities, but we always have to think about our ego. Our ego is so much involved in the attempt to improve intelligence that we often miss our current level of intelligence. And that's why we need to put the brakes on. There are so many barriers to critical thinking. We need to stop, and actually do thinking instead of just going with our memory biases and trying to make decisions as quickly as possible. So to help you put the brakes on, expose the genius you already have, and reverse engineer how some really, really smart people use their minds, let's look at a number of signs of intelligence that could indicate genius. And as we go through these, there's no particular order of importance, but I want us to see ourselves in the picture and also see little clues that can help each and every one of us be smarter. And put those brakes on, because that's one of the smartest things that we can do. So the number one sign of genius is really intense interest. So there's a 1992 essay, it's really interesting, called Why Children Follow in Their Parents' Career Footsteps. It's dated, but the authors observe parents and they see that social forces like economic potential plays a really small role at the end of the day. Children don't think critically about, how they could make a good life. They think about what their parents did, according to Labant and Lentz, who wrote this article. And they argue that genetics isn't nearly as powerful in determining a child's future career. Now, this conclusion is very different than, say, Francis Galton's notion of hereditary genius. Galton thought genetics was so important, he argued for eugenics, which is, verboten now and a total taboo. Well, I would suggest that if you want to be a genius, forget about nature versus nurture as much as you can. Now, obviously, you want to pump the brakes right there. What do you mean, forget about nature versus nurture? You do want to think about those things. But what I want to point out here is that if you have an intense interest in something, a burning curiosity, that's a sign that you could be a genius in that field. Pursue it. The power of now is here with you now. Part of developing higher intelligence comes down to looking your situation in the face, seeing the pressure that you have from your parents, from your historical situation, from your society, acknowledging those pressures, and then following your dreams anyway. Beethoven had huge health obstacles, but he didn't let those obstacles get in his way. He still pursued his passion. So genius is not a thing. It's an action, it's a choice, and it lies in the choice to pursue the dream no matter what the obstacles are. And as the Stoics say, the obstacle is the way. And if this bold claim makes sense to you, hit that thumbs up, get subscribed, and if you still feel stuck, look up my video on mental strength exercises. It will help you feel the opportunity to go with your passion and have the wherewithal to take the chance anyway, even with society saying no at every corner. Believe me, it says no to me all the time too, and I still keep moving. The next sign of genius is people who interrogate the truth. Whereas some people mindlessly join groups without taking a second to look at its history and its politics, other people do a genealogy. Where does this group come from? Who's in it? Why are they in it? How did they come to make the decisions about the group that they did, and so forth? This is something that the comedian Jamie Loftus did when she infiltrated the ranks of Mensa, and she exposed what's really going on, at least in one group. And as a spoiler alert, in the final episode of her podcast on being part of Mensa, Loftus reveals that members in Mensa that she encountered think that intelligence is fixed, which science and critical thinking reveals cannot be the case. So it kind of makes you wonder, right? And you don't have to do this kind of immersion journalism that she did in order to poke around. Ask philosophical questions. Don't take things at face value. Asking questions is one of the smartest things you can do. And who knows, you might find tremendous value in a self-described high IQ group or something like that. But you might also wonder, if they're so intelligent, well, why do they need to take down their critics like they did with popular YouTuber Flammable Mass? Look, there's wonderful things to learn in just about anything, but as you keep your mind open, you don't want to let your brains fall out. So, people who question the truth are often more genius than the people who call themselves genius, because when they're investigated and someone criticizes them, their response should also show the mark of genius, not a quest to shut down those different perspectives. And as someone in this business of how you can be smarter myself, I find the depths to which certain charlatans go to shut down any criticism of them very, very shocking. And with AI helping people scan websites and memory hole any criticism of their business because they have business interests, our willingness together in our community and every community that you ever belong to, that willingness to interrogate the truth is one of the biggest signs of genius out there. And not only that, but if you were wrong in the past, not to hide that wrong, but to admit it and move on and keep bringing it forward. Really, really important. That's a true sign of genius. Admitting when you're wrong and asking questions so that you might find the truth. And ultimately understanding that the truth is an emerging property. New data is coming into play all the time. And if you're beholden to hiding or diminishing the truth because you belong to a group, your intelligence has some distance to go. The next sign of genius is slow logic, not speed rationality. Humans are computing machines. I've talked about Ramon Llull and the memory wheels and how it helps compute arguments very, very quickly. But information comes in, our brains examine the symbols, and we either spit out a response or we take time to consider it. Our ancestors really have tried to help us slow down time and time again. This is what philosophy is. There's a 90 BCE book called Rhetorica ad Herennium that helped speakers use logic and reason better, especially in court. Instead of rapid-fire responses a debater might regret later, Rhetorica ad Herennium helps you think structurally through how arguments work. So when you respond, you use structure to explain and validate your point. Look, our world is filled with people who sound smart, but often they're just computing quickly. It's word salad they're putting out there, not genius, but it can have the appearance of a lot of smarts. So consider people who consider their thoughts, speak in measured tones, and work on doing so yourself. But try to have variety. There's all kinds of fun to be had by listening to word salad people, and sometimes there's a lot of gems in the salad, a lot of tomatoes, so to speak, that can be mighty tasty to feast upon, and just keep thinking about them, but don't respond so quickly. Try to find the background behind certain ideas. Interrogate, 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 and the faster it's coming out of people's mouths, often the more we need to spend time fact-checking, contextualizing, and placing in some sort of historical order what's being said. And always think, why is this person saying this? And what do they get if they get to be right about what's coming out of their mouth? That will reveal a lot, especially when it's coming out quickly. Now, another sign of genius is having some sort of courage. I believe that all of us have an attraction to weird and unconventional ideas, but often we suppress them out of fear that we'll be judged, or we've been trained by our society to be more conservative than we actually would be if we were more free to follow our passions. And when you use slow rationality, like I've just said, instead of speed word salad, you may find that your interest in even the strangest things can actually be explained, and you can learn to explain yourself and your passions in a way that actually endears you to people. Look at Stephen King. Yeah, he's got lots of detractors, and sometimes he says things that I would criticize, but overall, the dude is into some weird, dark, bizarre stuff, and yet he sells millions of books. Millions of people watch movies based on his books, and millions of people watch, interviews with him and so forth. And a lot of it has to do with the courage to lean into strange and unorthodox ideas, but also having patience and willingness to explain and slowly explain time and time again. And he's written many, many forewords explaining himself. He's written Danse Macabre, for example, which itself is an explanation of the horror genre, which must have taken a lot of time to put that history together. This is a sign of genius. Someone who not only can explain to you the unorthodox ideas that they have, but also give it a history slowly. Another sign of genius is embracing mistakes. Learning involves taking on chaos. There's no two ways about it. But when you can find structure and paths along the way by shining light into the darkness, you are a genius. There's no two ways about it. Persist. Bring the light of research. Do that slow learning. Do that history. And you will have more light than you could ever use to shine into the darkness. So many people are afraid of making mistakes, or they have some unrealistic need to understand everything correctly the first time. That's not possible. You have to learn and relearn over and over and over again. Not making mistakes isn't even desirable. Every learning cycle needs errors. Geniuses also know that you're going to run into learning plateaus. Memory athletes like Johannes Malo has been on the podcast to talk about how he uses journaling in a particular way to identify errors that are being made in his practice, find the weak spots, and then determine ways to fix them. Something that's only possible when you're able to objectively look at everything and externalize it in a journal. So you have that data. You're not trying to juggle it in your head, but you're able to see it, find the trends, and then you're much more able to embrace mistakes objectively. Geniuses also teach themselves. There's a book, Genius, a very short introduction, and it is very short indeed, but very valuable to read. Andrew Robinson quotes in this book the 19th century polymath Thomas Young. Thomas Young studied at 3 of the most famous universities of his time, and he concluded, whoever would arrive at excellence must be self-taught. And he's making some criticisms of the fellow students that he met at these universities, and he critiques them. And he just observed that a lot of people were going to school, and I think they still go to school, because they're motivated by outside factors. Some of those pressures that we talked about before, from society, from family. And a sign of genius is just acknowledging those pressures and moving into your own zone of genius and passion anyway. You find that inner genius by understanding what it is that you want to do and finding ways to do it. Scott Young, he's been on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. He showed that it's possible to get degrees at major universities without attending them at all. And he calls his self-study process ultra learning. Kind of a cool name for it. It is basically making your own learning journey and controlling your own environment. So let's look at it a little bit more about controlling environments. So many people fail to experience the full potential of their genius because they're cramming or they're studying in highly distracting environments. I used to study on the bus all the time myself, but it was never ideal. So I used some self-analysis. I structured my time in particular ways when I was at university, and I found the best places to study for me. And I had lists of them so that wherever I was in the city of Toronto, or when I lived in New York, or wherever I was, scheduling put myself in the places that worked for me to be able to study with minimal distraction. When you can reduce distractions, your focus and concentration will go up. And as the great Harry Lorraine pointed out many times during his career, memory starts with attention. So enable yourself to pay focused attention, and your genius will automatically go up. There are so many examples of geniuses who controlled their environment. I won't go into them, but just take Einstein, for example. He was very, very good at putting time aside, controlling environments, and he used to walk with Gödel all the time. And they would have wonderful conversations that stimulated each other's genius. That's just another example of making sure that your time is structured. And there's also multiple kinds of intelligence. I'm focused on learning and remembering facts and so forth, but there's military intelligence, so to speak, martial art intelligence, being able to know your environment and make decisions that are leading you to the best possible outcome in a flash. So one of the things that I really find interesting is also the meta-learning skills. So part of genius is being able to pick up new skills as quickly as possible. You're able to take a foundation of meta-learning, how to learn, what's involved in that. You do it through habit stacking. You spend some time learning how to learn, which is what Memory Techniques is all about at magneticmerymethod.com. And you then have a structured approach to anything new that you want to learn. Rather than going in hurdy-gurdy and willy-nilly, you go in with an understanding that you've spent some time on. So meta-learning is another sign of genius. And now that you've discovered some of the highest possible signs of genius, let's look at a couple of practices that you can do and how you can master each. It's not just about controlling your time, it's also about the techniques. So it's essential to master your memory. And the major techniques that I suggest involve memory palaces, some kind of number system, like a major method or the PAO system, number rhymes, and don't worry if exploring the ancient memory techniques makes you feel like a kid again. That's another sign of genius, the ability to play. There's other accelerated learning techniques like mind mapping, exploring advanced spaced repetition with memory wheels, using flashcards, Zettelkasten, and so forth. These are techniques that are used by lots and lots of people who have a long-term vision for what they want to learn and how they want to apply that knowledge throughout life, and they will help you achieve big goals, and they'll also create the confidence needed to go into the unknown. I have a whole video about using mind mapping to help build confidence, make better decisions that you can watch, and I'll share the link with you for that down in the description below or somewhere on this page, wherever you're watching this. It's not that geniuses are unafraid, it's that they temper the fear with developing all of these tactics, and they can feel nervous and take action anyway. One of my students shared with me that he took one of my personal mantras that I say a lot on my podcast and on my YouTube channel, action reveals, stasis conceals. And he gave me this beautiful image of his desktop art that he used that phrase in. And I love that he did this. And he shared it with me, and I'm sharing it with you now that he did this. It's a genius move in itself to use mantras that help you remember to take action. Memory is a miraculous thing. It's well worth training. And that doesn't mean that you have to use memory palaces all the time. You can create visual cues in your environment. In fact, the science of context-dependent memory strongly suggests that we should arrange our environments to use things like little phrases so that we remind ourselves to take action. Take action, take action, take action, because action really does reveal. And stasis conceals. It freezes you. And it is not genius to sit there and do nothing. Take action and you will be able to experience your genius. Our dearly departed Tony Bazan, he used to say we're all born geniuses. We're all born artists. We're all born scientists. And he would talk about how a baby learns to explore a piece of paper. They might crumple it up. They might put it in their mouth to taste it. They might draw on it. Well, that's being an artist. That's being a scientist. It's experimenting. It's exploring. But conditioning through observing our parents, which has a lot to do with implicit memory that gets things in the mind that create behaviors that repeat again and again that are against our best interests, that's not good. But we can learn to understand that that's happening, and we can take another path. Our teachers, our coworkers, they beat creativity and curiosity out of us, but it doesn't have to be that way. Get into memory training. Visit me at magneticmerymethod.com. Make an unwavering commitment to making your mind as powerful as possible without falling into the trap of perfectionism, because perfectionists aren't even good at being perfect. Take action. I hope you enjoyed the signs of genius here, some of the tools that I suggested, and never forget, action reveals, and more is more. So take action. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your thumbs up. And I would suggest if you have any sort of hesitation, fear, self-doubt whatsoever, go ahead, watch my video on using mind maps to help create confidence and courage next.